Welcome everyone to episode 25 of the Exoskeletons and Wearable Robotics podcast. We have a very special guest with us, Andre Jutel, who is a distributor with Stanley Handling. So this is going to be our first business-focused episode and get to see the world of exoskeletons from that point of view. I think right now there's over 200 exoskeleton distributors, and usually I don't get to talk or write much about them. So this is going to be a very special episode, hopefully the first of many. And before we get started, we have not one but two new Patreons as of this recording. Special thanks to Hypershell for choosing to support us, as well as Sebastian Stassin. Welcome to the EXR family. And as usual, this is a good time to mention our VIP supporters, Walter Bartenbach, Rita Vasquez Torres, Minmar, and our corporate level sponsors, Humotech, Oxivo, HeroWare, Digity, and now joined by Hypershell. Thank you all for your support. It's both a moral support and a financial support. It lets us know to keep going with this. So, hi, Tom. Welcome back from vacation. And hi, Andre. Thank you for joining us. Could you introduce yourself?
Good evening or good morning where you are, suspect.
Indeed. A little bit of a time difference. You're in the UK, right?
Yeah, it's 20 to 7 at night here.
Oh, so good evening to you.
Yes, good evening.
So how did you get involved with Stanley and exoskeletons?
Oh, so my background actually is tech. So I actually started my tech life, a long time ago, more looking at, so I was in the lighting industry for nearly 20 years, looking at LED technology. And so I had a long career within lighting, mainly looking at communications, lighting, semiconductors, that kind of thing, and electronics in general. And then I just, like most industries, time takes its toll on you and the industry, and I was just fed up of the usual problem of how much does it cost this week. When it comes to LEDs, you get pretty bored eventually of that. So tried a few different things within the light industry, and then eventually I just thought, I can't do this anymore. And I literally just was sat in front of LinkedIn one day, and I saw an advert for a company, and I thought, exoskeleton, what the hell was that? And I looked at it and I thought, ooh, now that is something I could really get passionate about, because outside of work, most of my time is spent, I like to keep fit and I like to sort of look after myself. So that was a kind of extension of something that I already believed in. So I started looking at this advert and thought, maybe I should just write this company a crazy letter. And I thought the likelihood of them taking on some old git like me is probably fairly limited, but they were looking for someone in the UK. And so I wrote them a note, and next thing I got back, oh yeah, okay, then we'll interview you. So a number of interviews later, I ended up working for a company called German Bionic. And that was my introduction to exoskeletons. And obviously, they're a very interesting product, a very interesting active exoskeleton, clever product. Anyway, but I'd been working for them for a while, and then I was actually doing quite a funny story. I was actually doing a trade show in Birmingham, not far from where I live. And my now boss was sat in the audience, listening to a demonstration I was doing on the German Bionic product, and he thought, actually, I think we need to get this guy to come and work for us. He's just what we're looking for. And of course, at the time, I didn't know this. I'm quite happily, chugging away with German Bionic. And next thing you know, I get a LinkedIn message. Would you be interested in coming to and having a talk to us? So various things happened in the meantime. And anyway, next thing I know, I'm sat in their offices thinking, I quite like this. I like this place. It had a nice feel to it. And that was, nearly 2 years ago now. So that's how it's come. And I think something that we're very proud of at Stanley. I mean, Stanley itself as a business has been around for almost 80 years. So our business is manual handling. My division, which is the wearable tech and safety division, is all about looking at ergonomics, improving the way that people do things, but also measuring them. Finding a way to look at things. And of course, with my exoskeleton background, which has grown massively since I joined Stanley, because we're lucky. We're not what you would call a distributor. We're a kind of fully paid up supporter of the products that we get involved in. So, I always think of a distributor as someone that sticks something in the shop window, and you come along and you've stuck it in and you've made 30-40% on it, and the bloke buys it and off he goes. Whereas with us, what we do is we fully support the implementation and the understanding of how you implement an exoskeleton. And there's a lot of work that goes into that. There's a huge amount of understanding, there's a huge amount of education. I mean, particularly with the UK market, because I would say we're probably 18 months to 2 years behind where, say, Central Europe is with exoskeletons, because it's still a bit of a novelty here. You know, you talk to people and they think I'm going to turn up with something out of RoboCop or Aliens. And usually when they see it, they go, oh, is that it then? Oh, right. And then, of course, when you explain to them that RoboCop and Aliens would be lovely in a film, I'll tell you a funny story, man, about something that happened to me recently. But when you see those things and explain to people, I'd give you about 10 minutes in one and you'd take it off because you wouldn't be able to breathe and you'd feel stupid and it'd give you muscle atrophy in the long term. They go, oh. So then they start to understand why an exoskeleton and what that is. And there's a lot of education that goes into that process in terms of looking and understanding why should somebody even think of putting one of these things on. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions about what the technology is about. You know, oh, will it turn me into a superhuman? No. Will I be able to lift all? No. Oh, right. So when people start to understand what an exoskeleton's about, they suddenly realize that in reality, it's just another form of MHE. You know, it's just another type of product that can be used in the last mile of whatever they're doing to make their lives easier, simpler, less stressful, less fatiguing, and hopefully in the long run, make their lives better so that when they do eventually retire, and I don't know what the US is like, but in the UK, most of us probably won't retire ever, but by the time I come to retirement age. So we really are going to need exoskeletons, because there are going to be people out there, you know, in the 90s going, I've got to lift that for a living. There you go. You're going to need one of these, Grandpa, because that's exactly what we're talking about. So I think there is, and that, you know, on a serious note, is aging workforce is a huge amount of what I tend to deal with. And there's a big disparity between the younger workers and the older workers. The older workers, I'm not putting that on because I think I'm going to look stupid in front of my friends. Younger workers often go, yeah, I'll put that on. I've seen what my man looks like. It's not pretty, and I don't want to end up like he is at 60. So yeah, put that on me because I want to avoid. And of course, the level of education that I see in young people, I look at my own children, they're regular gym bunnies. They're in and out of the gym all the time. They've got the health bug that we never were given in my generation, the Generation X. It was never kind of, it was, you go to work, you keep your head down. If you're lucky, you get a bowl of fruit and a coffee machine, and you should be happy with that. You should be really happy that we've given that to you. Whereas now, I think look at my children's generation, their attitudes towards health is completely different to mine. They're about looking after themselves, about, that longevity, because they're kind of going to have to. I don't think they're going to have the luxury of being able to say, well, I'll be retired at 60. No, sadly, you probably won't be. You probably won't be retired until you're 80. So being able to bring a certain amount of longevity to the working population, in my opinion, is critical. Getting them to adopt it, which we'll certainly go on to talk about, that's another story. But I'll just leave you with this story. I had a phone call recently from a film studio, a very famous film studio in the UK called Pinewood Studios. They make the James Bond films, etc., etc. The garment said, "Oh, hello. I'd like to borrow one of your exoskeletons." And I said, "Well, we're not a manufacturer. We're a solutions provider." And he said, "Oh, right, okay." I said, "So, what are you using it for? Are you carrying camera equipment?" "Oh, no. I want to put it in a film." So I said, "Sorry, how do you mean you want to put it in a film?" And he said, "No, I want to put it in a film. I want it as a prop." So I just laughed and I said, "Oh dear." I said, "Prepare yourself for a huge amount of disappointment." So he said, "What do you mean?" I said, "What you think an exoskeleton is and what an exoskeleton actually is, they ain't the same thing." And I said, "You've got Aliens, Avatar, Robocop in your head." Yeah. Nothing like that, mate. He went, "Oh, right." And I showed him a photo of a couple of exoskeletons and he went, "Oh, I see what you mean. It's really nothing like that, is it?" And he went, "Oh, sorry about that. I've completely misinterpreted." And I said, "Don't worry. You're just a very perfect example of what I get all the time when I talk to people, that they think this is something which it clearly isn't." So, I'm sure you've had it yourself, Bobby.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. You're touching on so many good points. I'm wondering, could you tell us a little bit more like about Stanley itself? For
Yeah,
example, I
sure.
know that you partner with WearHealth. Like,
Yes.
how does that work? What does it look like?
So where the partnership with WearHealth is a crucial one for us because I don't know about you guys, but I'm not a fan of purely subjectivity. You know, it's because subjectivity involves opinions, and of course, opinions aren't necessarily facts. And so when we look at the way in which we go to market as a business, a huge amount of what we do, particularly today, is data driven. Now, there's very little point in me going to a client and saying, right, okay, let me read you this 50-page white paper about exoskeletons. They'd go, what? I don't want to know about that. I don't even understand what you're talking about. What's an electrocardiogram? What? I don't understand. So the WearHealth platform allows us to be able to give a very objective and subjective look at an exoskeleton in the client's business, in their specific site or group of sites. So how that works is the front end of it is looking at their AI app. So we film using the AI app, what we call the WearHealth, what we call phase 2 exoskeleton selection. And effectively how that works for us is because as a business, Stanley isn't tied to one particular manufacturer. And part of our work is to uncover which particular exoskeleton off the open market is most likely to be the most specific, or you know, which ones would be most liable to be for those particular use cases. Now, I always look at use cases in kind of three ways. I look at the first use case being what I would call floor to waist lifting. Then the second use case being waist and out in front of me. And then the third being waist and above, because it's difficult to get all of those right in one exoskeleton. So there are obviously, with the manufacturers that we work with, we look at different, you know, biomechanically how people are working. The WearHealth apps gives us a very quick understanding of where the level of postural risk is. So, yeah, where is that? Is it 50% shoulders, 10% shoulders, 30% back? You know, where is that? Where is that likely to cause issues going forward? Where's the most likely part of the body that's going to suffer more musculoskeletal disorders potentially within that particular use case? Then we start looking at things like, okay, what's the environment like? I could go into an ATEX environment where you can't use an active product because it's got a lithium-ion battery, explosion problems. I can go into areas where there's high care for food, where they need a very specific level of sanitization. I can go into areas where it's very constrained. The biggest one that I tend to find normally is when you look at people moving onto MHE equipment. And often you'll film a use case and they'll go, this is the use case. I'm lifting this bag's 20 kilogram, tipping it into this hopper. I put it down and I'll take the next one and do that. And I always then say, what do you do next? Oh, right. Well, I walk over to that lollop or that forklift truck and get on it. Instantly, that will preclude a certain amount of manufacturers straight away because they won't be able to get on that truck even with the product on. It'd be too big. They won't be able to sit down in it because it'd be too uncomfortable. And especially if it's a passive, it's a resistive product. So they're going to be fighting it all the time. So you have to look at all of those different elements. Repetition. You know, is this a task that you do repeatedly? And that's part of the WearHealth app. There's a questionnaire in there. What weights you're dealing with? How frequently do you do this? Are the breaks you take, are they, is it static work? Is it dynamic? Are you moving a lot? Are you walking a lot? So we need all of that information helps us to understand which the most likely candidates off the open market are going to be as close to that use case as we can make them. Then, assuming the client then says, yeah, that's a good idea, we like that, we're going to look at the report, WearHealth then produce a report for us that shows us the task, it lists the repetition, lists what our tasks are doing, where posturally there is the problem within the body, what percentage of a problem it is that task seen as low level or low risk, medium risk or high risk? And usually the high risk element of it is fairly small, but enough to be considered high risk, and it's usually weight, repetition, those are the factors we all know. Now, of course, once we get to that point, they also say, well, we believe in this particular use case, you might wish to use a Levo, a Hapo, a Skelex, a Hitrius product, you know, a Jape product, whichever manufacturer. And of course, we get a justification for doing that. And then it's graded, as good, as fair, good, and optimal. And so that gives us a really good, quick understanding of which particular product is most suitable for the client. Then the other thing that I always try to do is I try to look at, let's say I've got 5 use cases I've filmed. I try to look at an element of rationalization, because the last thing your client wants is 5 different types of exoskeleton. It's confusing. They'll just be in a mess. So what I try to do is to try to, as best as I can, as long as there's not too much compromise, is look at 1 to 3 exoskeletons, usually 2. And the way that I normally work our trials, which we'll go on to talk about, is if we go to a trial situation, I usually like to say, okay, well, these 2 products have been these we believe are optimal for your use case. However, here's a 3rd product as an idea, because my experience tells me that I can have 2 brilliantly optimal products, but the strange thing is that this one over here that may have come in as good but not optimal is the one that they like because they like it the best, because it fits the best and they feel the most comfortable in it. And as you guys know, comfort and acceptance is our biggest challenge, or at least for me, it's my biggest challenge, worker acceptance. And we'll go on to talk about, I could literally give you a podcast series on worker acceptance, but as we know, so a lot of that comes down to my experience of understanding, yes, these 2 are optimal, but I can already see that lady over there, she ain't going to wear that because that exoskeleton was designed for a man, and that's not going to work. And she's going to find it uncomfortable, and she instantly will be set against it. So that's why the WearHealth app is so useful for us, because we're agnostic to the most part to the manufacturers, but we're not agnostic to the technology. And so people, a lot of my work is about getting people to think, about getting them to think, saying, look, I know that right now you might think, who's this weird white-haired bloke that's turned up with an exo, whatever it's called, why should I put one of them on? All it is just an inconvenience. It's change that I don't want. It's an inconvenience I'm not prepared. But I used to say to me, I get that. But in 20 years' time, when you're lying on the couch and your back's, you're knackered, you might have to have a back operation. You might think back to the conversation we had and thought, yeah, I remember that really strange white-haired bloke coming with that exo thing. You know what? That might have actually been a good idea. It might have actually prevented me looking like I do now. And of course, I can't go, if I had a time machine, I could probably go, by the way, Dave, this is you in 20 years' time. And he goes, that's not me. Yeah, that's you, mate. That's you. You look just like that. Now, good news is I can prevent you looking like that. This is you in 20 years' time after having worn an exoskeleton. And so, but of course, we're not a company that makes wild claims. We try to educate people with the science that's there, but get them to think, because a lot of my business is about getting people to think. Now, there'll be some people, as you know, that literally couldn't care less about their health. They'll eat all of the horrible foods, drink, smoke, gamble, and do all the things that they shouldn't do. That's not really my audience. I'm there for the people that maybe think, maybe there is a better way. Maybe if we as a company adopt this technology from the management side, healthier, happier workers, longevity. I've seen it. I've seen what exoskeletons can do for people, and some of that transformative element is amazing. I've worked with companies and people come in going, thank God you persevered with this, because you know what? I was one story, a guy who said, I haven't been able to pick my daughter off the floor for the last year because of my back. He was 28 years old. He said, for the first time in a long time, now I'm wearing this at work, I can actually bend down and pick my daughter up. Now, that's a win for me. It transposes just his work life, and it has a knock-on effect on his personal life. And so if we can get to that point with people where they understand the benefits and the fact that there is a huge benefit outside their own working life as well as their working life, I believe that's a win for us all. So I hope that gives you sort of a better idea of why we use WearHealth, and they do a great job for us. They're a very good partner of ours. But also, I think in finishing off, it paints Stanley as a company who are independent. Those reports are not generated by Andre Jutel. They're not generated by Graham Sharp, our CEO. They're generated by a completely independent company to us that just give us the facts. And if those facts aren't great, we'll tell people, sorry, this isn't going to work for you. But equally, if the data is there, then at least the people in management looking at data can go, you know what? I reckon this exoskeleton thing is got some legs. I reckon this could work here. We've got the justification from the data in our site, our trial, our exact people. And so at least that's something. At least it's not just, well, we asked Dave and Margaret and they didn't like it, so we're not going to implement them. That's not enough. People need to be in receipt of the facts. And so we believe we can get as close as we can. It's not perfect. It's not foolproof, but as close as we can to those facts of giving them something which they can at least go, I've got something I can make a decision on. And the facts are fairly reasonable. Most people will not invest in things they don't understand. Why would you? It's too much of a risk. They want to know, is this going to work? What's the long-term benefit? Should I put my dollars, dineros, pound notes, whatever you like, on the line and buy them? And if the answer to that is, I'm not sure because I've got no data, that's a hard sell.
Wow. Well, in 25 episodes that we've been doing this, I can safely say that this is the first time that I'm speechless. I'm so happy that we have you on. Just a quick background for our listeners. I was fortunate to be hired for a very short project, which was to take a look at distributors across the world for exoskeletons, which is how I have that number in my head. That is about 200 of them. And that was last year. And Stanley stood out as something different. So this is not a commercial for Stanley. We're not getting paid to have them. But last year when I was doing the research, I was like, oh, this is different. And I was telling everyone internally about it. To Tom, to ASTM, to everyone who was willing to listen. It's like, look, these guys are trying to explain and sell exoskeleton technology in a different way. So this is how we got here now to this podcast episode. And I have so many questions and things that obviously I would want you to do a deeper dive in. So one thing that Tom and I have discussed many times, and we've discussed it with other companies, is how to get those success stories and user testimonials to bubble up into the public domain. So I've had a section on that for a while when I was doing the digital magazine. Some companies right now have dedicated blog posts, which is like a success story from users and super users. I know Oxivo started one. I'm confident. Right now, off the top of my head, I can't think of the other ones, but I know that they are out there. But I've been in my previous work, you worked with LED, I worked in iron chromatography. There was a separate department that was completely separate from the marketing department and the applications department, which was one of their tasks was to just have a giant catalog of success stories, which is customer 252 bought our equipment using these peripherals. They applied it to this. Here's their testimonial. Here's how they're using it. Here's how it's working for them. And it's this like giant data vault, public facing catalog that has nothing to do with the marketing department. So it's just for people to quickly see, hey, like I'm a winery. Has any winery used an exoskeleton? And I just type in exoskeleton, winery, or just winery, forget exoskeleton. Yeah. And they get like boom, 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 boom. We used it in, these guys used it in trimming. These guys used it in moving the barrels. These guys used it in compression, extraction of seeds. And you start now capturing the imagination of people. And it's like, oh, it's like you say, it's not an academic white paper. It's people that are my people, my colleagues in the same industry, sharing with the universe how they've made workers' life better. Or if it didn't work out, like what went wrong.
Yeah, practical examples, in other words.
So how do we get to that? How do we get to these?
Oh, well, you've got there's a few issues already there. Now, of course, we've got some customers using them, and sometimes they don't want to, they're like, look, we love it, but we can't tell you we love it. Why not? Well, because the way that our operation works is we don't get, you're a big company, we're not allowed to say stuff like that because it looks like we're favoring you. so we can't really do that. And then got other people who go, sure, yeah, I'll give you a testimony. I'll give you an interesting example. I was contacted by a surgeon, and you can look this up. It's all out in the public domain. And he said, oh, hi, I'm a cardiothoracic surgeon, and I've seen some products on the internet, and I'm 62 years old. I sort of, in the twilight of my career, and to be quite honest, and it's an English expression you may not be familiar with, but I'm knackered. In other words, I'm tired out. And I think an exoskeleton could really help improve the work I do. And so we said, okay. He said, what can you do for me? I said, I'll tell you what, I'll lend you one. He went, oh, great. He said, well, could you come along and show me how it works? And in this particular case, it was a Hapo product. And he said, oh, this is great. Yes, this is really, really good. He said, look, I'm not going to lie to you. The way that things work in the National Health Service here in the UK, it'll probably take me a year before we get anywhere. I said, that's okay. I said, keep it as long as you need. I said, we really got on well, me and this surgeon. And he was a really nice gentleman. I said, right, well, look, the work you do is life critical. We're quite happy as a company to let you have one for the time being and see how you get on with it. Well, about 8 weeks later, he rings me. Oh, good news. I've just done the world's first double lung transplant using an exoskeleton. What? He said, yeah, I did it last night. He said, lady came in about an hour from passing away, and I transplanted both of her lungs. Whoa, okay. Man, how did it go? Phenomenal. Best thing I've ever done. He said, I'm not going to lie. He said, after doing that operation, he said, I went home and he said, I had one of the best sleeps I've had in years, and I was back in the next day. So I said, yeah, because I remember you telling me that after doing an operation like that, it can be anything between 8 and 12 hours, you're completely wiped out. You can't think, function, you're tired out, incredibly, it's a very stressful thing to do. I mean, the gowning up and the sanitization takes 2 to 3 hours for an operation like that. And he said, we cut the time of the operation down. I think it was about an hour and a half, 2 hours. So he said, an absolute unmitigated success. I love it. So I said, do you know what? I said, I wish I could take you around to all my customers and say, you don't like this product very much. Here's a gentleman that just put a new set of lungs in a lady. And you know what? He reckons they're pretty good. I reckon that his work is a bit more important than you lifting up that box. However, I'm not going to be presumptuous, but this guy's just saved someone's life using an exoskeleton. So you know what? I reckon it's going to be okay for you lifting those boxes. You might sweat a bit, but the long-term future for you, my friend, is far better. And so we're now entering a kind of critical stage with that, where we're looking at WearHealth with the sensors and proving what the difference is before and after that operation. This will take a long time, but that actual operation was presented to the Royal Society of Cardiothoracic Surgeons up in Edinburgh not that long ago. They're all fascinated. Now, for me, that's the pinnacle. That's as high as it gets. And if you look on our website, you can see that operation. Not the whole thing, obviously, because we don't want to terrify people, but you can see Dr. Koshbin doing the operation in the exoskeleton. It's out in the open. It's out in the open. It's been in medical journals. Now, for me, that's as good as it gets, because that's saving someone's life. And I've done programs on the TV about this sort of thing as well, and I often get called to do podcasts and talk about stuff. But for me, it's this isn't a job, it's a vocation. This is I feel I have a duty to look at these things. And so when you're asking about referrals and testimonials, they're quite a difficult thing to get sometimes, because people really want to give them to you, but the way that they're marketing, oh no, we can't do that, we're not allowed to do that. So we have to try and navigate our way around it. In fact, earlier on today, the lady who looks after marketing asked me, can you give me 3 customers who I can approach for some testimonials, bizarrely enough? And I gave her 3 that I think we'll all be very happy to do so. But you're right, it can be very frustrating, and I suspect, like most companies, some of their best customers are the ones that they can't mention, they can't say anything about, and they love it. But internally, someone's said, no, that could open us up to litigation. It could open us up to something we don't want to deal with, or it might look like we're favouring company A over company B, or that's not our policy. So I think it's very difficult. I mean, the one that springs to mind, probably for someone like Otterbach, was when IKEA announced that they were going to be taking on the Otterbot product for, I think it was 600 exoskeletons. Now, for me personally, as someone in the industry, I welcome that. I mean, Otterbot, I don't really compete. We don't really compete against them because they're a manufacturer. we don't get involved with their products. Well, I know their products from a few people I've worked with, but good on them. It's good that they've got someone like IKEA to go, yeah, we'll put our hands and go, yeah, we want to do that. And I think in time, you'll start to see more of that sort of thing happening. But it's a struggle. And I think that there's that. Nobody wants to look like they're first. And of course, none of them are. And usually when I explain to people exoskeleton technology, in reality, has been around about 10 to 12 years. But in actual reality, the first exoskeleton was developed in 1895, and has been around since exoskeletons have been built since the 1950s. But most people think it only happened last year. Oh, never heard of this, particularly in the UK. I've never seen this before. And then when you tell them there are hundreds of different exoskeletons on the market, they usually, oh, wow, didn't know that. And so I think the education process behind exoskeletons is crucial, and also cutting through the rubbish, and telling it to people like it is. I always tell people the worst things about them first. It's going to make you sweat. It's going to annoy you. Someone will go, ha, 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 robot boy. It's going to happen. These are the things that will happen. However, think of it like your safety shoes. If you drop something on your foot, you're going to be happy you had them on, aren't you? Yeah. Okay. So if you're lifting heavy weights constantly and this stops your back screaming, or it puts you in a better ergonomic position biomechanically, and it's going to help you relieve some of that strain in your back muscles, do you not think that's going to be a win? And often they go, yeah. But a lot of people, they can't get past change. It's too much for them. And yet I look at exoskeletons in a sort of way as I look at safety shoes. I had it wasn't an argument. It was an interesting debate, let's say, with someone recently who said, no, I can't see this. And I went, okay. I said, so tell me something. When your staff come in the morning, do they all get a choice of what footwear they want to put on? And he looked at me and he went, what do you mean? I went, well, they've all got safety boots on. Surely the way that you operate this place based on what you've just told me, you give them a choice. Someone go, are you going to have safety boots or you can have your Nikes? Which one do you want to put on? And he went, of course we don't. I went, why? And he went, well, because obviously if they crush their foot, then we're liable to get sued. I went, yeah, but it's not in law. It's not mandatory in law, but it's considered good practice. So I'm struggling to work out why protecting someone's back, shoulders is not the same idea. And he looked at me and for a minute, he couldn't give me an answer. And he went, well. And I said, it's change. That's the problem, isn't it? Change. Fear of change. And he sort of went, well, yeah, I suppose so. And it's also that fear of, but I don't want to tell somebody that they've got to wear it. So I think we've got a long way to go. I think the things that will change the way that exoskeletons are adopted, possibly, and again, I don't know about other territories, but I think eventually there will be a precedent in law. Some smart lawyer somewhere, and I know because I'm talking to one at the moment, someone will say, hold on a minute, Mr. Barrister, Mr. Judge, if your client had put an exoskeleton on this gentleman who now has serious back problems a year ago, he might have prevented this problem. Now, some people would go, what? What's an exoskeleton? Right, well, this is a device and blah, blah, blah. But if you'd have made some reasonable adjustments for your staff, you could probably, or there's a likelihood, you could have avoided this problem where this individual is now suing you for X thousands of dollars or pounds or, euros. Whereas if we had this product available to him, the likelihood of him or her having this problem may have been reduced. Now, we're not saying, of course, that this is going into a statute of law, but the precedent of law, and he gave me a very good example about hearing products, that he won a case whereby he'd had a gentleman lost his hearing through very loud noises, but the company, the employer said, oh, no, nothing we could do about it because the headphones that we wear have to have a radio built in them. And he said, well, hold on a minute. there are two companies on the market that manufacture exactly that product, but with a white noise blocking system, whereby if a sudden very loud noise comes, it blocks that loud noise through white noise and would have prevented your employee going deaf. And of course, the judge and the barrister both went, we don't know anything about this. And he proved as a precedent in law that yes, actually, this could have been prevented if you had have employed this technology. And it was the way that he explained it was that ignorance of the law is no defense. So I wonder whether we will end up going this way with exoskeleton technology, that there's a body of evidence so strong that people say, do you know what? I can't even be bothered to argue this. We're going to have to make these mandatory for these particular types of manual handling cases because we can't afford to get sued. We can't afford for people. And there's another serious issue there about workers themselves that certainly in Europe, and I suspect in North America too, most companies are struggling to employ people. They can't get enough people to do manual handling jobs. So they're forced to either bring workers in from other territories, but even other territories are struggling. You know, when I look at, say, Eastern Europe, I talk to colleagues that I used to work with there, and they go, same problem here. Poland, Lithuania, Slovenia, Slovakia, all have problem. They can't get enough workers. So what do you do in a situation like that when you're sucking in workers and spitting them out because they've got a very hard job to do? You need to think of a solution. And exoskeletons, what we term last mile, may just be that solution and may prevent or may help an aging workforce who currently don't have the physical capacity to do those jobs. It may extend their life because, you know, I'll get to places and people say to me, oh, this is interesting. Then I'll say, why is that? And they say, well, I can't afford to retire. I don't have the money to retire. I'd love to retire, but I literally don't have the means to do so. I've got to carry on doing this job for another 10 years to get my pension. And I say, how does that make you feel? Terrible. In fact, actually, you know, right now I may get pensioned off because I physically can't do this job anymore. So, you know, I've had instances where people have said, thank God this technology is there because this will extend my lifespan. Company's happy because they've got great experience. They know how to do the job correctly. They retain that experience and that labor force. And of course, if I go into most companies, I would say the average age of people doing manual handling certainly starts from the mid-30s and goes up to people almost in their 70s. Now, if they're the sorts of people that really don't look after themselves, the chances of them retiring in anything other than discomfort and pain are pretty high. So I wish I could translate some of the things that I see into people's heads and it would horrify them. But that's an individual choice. And so I think we have a lot of barriers to break down, but we also have a lot of education to do to say this is viable. You can use this. Yes, there are disadvantages. There are things you won't like about them, but think about your long-term health. And a lot of companies I work with they really do put their workers first. They really do invest in their workers' health and well-being. It's often the workers themselves that are the blockers. Oh, I don't want that. You know, and it's quite sad sometimes when you see that, and it's that refusal to accept change. And I think that's, you know, for us all in the exoskeleton market, we have to break down some of these barriers, or if we can't, we'll wait for a precedence in law where people say, do this job here, you wear that. You can't come in unless you don't.
Yeah,
So
I've had first-hand experience with something as simple as safety glasses, where there was a department manager, highly respected, who just did not believe in them. He did not believe in safety glasses, and he just had regular street glasses. And a lot of people in the company looked up to him and they wanted to emulate his behavior so they wouldn't put on their safety glasses. And it is just such a simple thing where we're talking about a piece of inexpensive plastic which costs you like $3 to $9. There's infinite number of variations, colors, shapes, styles, level of protection from the super extreme chemical goggles that are pressed against your face with vents to just simple woodcut hobby level safety glasses. All of them work. All of them will add an additional layer of protection. All of them have UV protection as an added bonus. And even with that, I have seen a resistance where it's a mandatory policy. Every dog has with big letters, safety glasses required for you to enter this room, and it's still not being followed. Now, when you say, actually, Tom, do you have any questions?
No, I'm just really enjoying the conversation and listening, because it's exactly some of the things that we've all been hearing. But what I like is that Stanley as a company is persevering, right? Like they're saying, we know sometimes there's barriers to this technology. We know some exoskeletons will work, some maybe won't work as well, but we'll try to find the one that works best for your situation. And I like the idea of the success stories. And I think it's too bad. I think a lot of companies, you know, the law, we're saying, hey, maybe someday it might be law like, hey, you need to protect the back, you need to protect the shoulders, you need to protect the neck, just like we're saying, you have to protect hearing, you have to protect vision, you have to protect people's toes. But I wonder, though, still, like some of these companies, they don't want to talk about it because they're scared. You know what I mean? They're scared saying like, oh, we don't want to publicize that a material handling job is tough.
Yeah, correct.
You know, we don't want to publicize that that's a tough job, you know, in the sense of, and I've seen this. So like examples I've heard of is like one of the WearHealth conferences, people were talking about some of the older workers making fun of the younger workers wearing an exoskeleton for welding. But then when you look at some of these older workers that are welding, their shoulders are shot, done for, right? They're 55 years old and they, you know, can barely lift their arm up, right? And so I don't know how we communicate that, where, you know, this idea of, we talked about this as you know, WearCon, like worker wellness, like how do we describe this? Like you want to be healthy when you retire, right? So this worker wellness, this idea of like, we know we get old. So it's just, there's a lot of things going through my mind, but just hearing about how Stanley's persevering, they've got customers, they have a, and again, this is no, you know, we're not publicizing for Stanley. We went to their website, and people should go to their website. Their website is phenomenal. It's like, you know, if you have these jobs, think of this. They don't talk about an exoskeleton. They talk about what the human is doing. And then we will talk about, you know, things. So those are just things that have been bubbling up in my head. And maybe, Andre, you could.
Well, I think one of the things that you've touched on there, Thomas, is the fact that we're a manual handling company. We've been doing it nearly 80 years. So we do a lot of different things. Now, you know, we started off our business life 1948 manufacturing specialist forklift trucks, which we still do. You'd never have known it's one of ours because it was probably got Lansing, Crown, Toyota, someone else's name on it. But we still manufacture something called PLT. So powered trucks you push along like a pallet truck. We also have a division which we probably most people know us for in the larger corporations for stair climbing machines. Now, everything we do is designed to make people's lives easier. Now, I don't know about you, but if I'm trying to haul an air conditioning unit up into an apartment block, I ain't going to want to do that myself. I'd rather push a button and the wheels go up the stairs like that. Thanks very much. That's much simpler. And yet you wouldn't believe the amount of times that our engineers say to me, they don't want one. And you go, what? Oh, yeah, they'd rather move it themselves. And I go, are these people nuts? Yeah, what's wrong with them? And it's fear of change. It's that I've always done it this way. Why should I change now? Well, because there's some fairly overwhelming evidence for the fact that you'll end up in hospital. So maybe that's a good reason why. And then you look down and you go, I see you wear safety boots. And well, of course I do. And it's that ridiculous juxtaposition of, well, yeah, I mean, my back isn't anywhere near as important as my feet. Well, yeah, actually it is. It's quite important to have a good back. You might have nice protected feet, but the reality is that if you don't, and a friend of mine put some stuff together for me recently I said, do me a favor, claims. Well, you know, what are we talking about for just a minor back injury? Maybe a worker off 2 or 3 months. Right, well, you've got hospital visits, you've got £15,000 minimum. So I went, right, okay, so a fairly decent passive exoskeleton in pounds, obviously, you know, I'm not talking dollars here, same difference, you can do the conversion in your head, but a fairly half reasonable passive exoskeleton, let's say it's about £2,500. So that is a significantly less amount of money than one worker being off with their back for a couple of months. So, and that's the most basic, simplest cost. When it gets into I've really done some serious damage, £50,000 to £100,000. When it goes above that, £250,000. Now, most companies that I know can't afford to keep paying that out. And the thing that some people are maybe not understanding is that there are certain case laws now where people can go, do you know what? 5 years ago, I injured my hand. I'm going to sue that company now 5 years later. And they'll take that to court and they'll win punitive damages for that. And you think, well, that was 5 years ago, though. But some lawyer will go, I'll take that on because I reckon I can win this one, because certainly in the UK, the health and safety laws and the HSE, which is the governing body for health and safety, have got a lot smarter and they've got a lot more stringent. And I get this frequently. I get people ringing me up, customers of mine. Can you do me a favour and come to site? We've got a bit of a problem now. I go, what's the problem? Well, we were doing this particular job and the HSE came in and went, that's not very good. You need to do something about that. Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. So they call me in and they go, have you got an exoskeleton that can help us with that? We don't always. Sometimes look at it and go, yeah, well, that's a tough job, that one. Whereas the other day I got called into somewhere, I won't mention where, and they said, this is what we've been asked to do. And I went, I've got the perfect exoskeleton for that. And great, fantastic. And we'll have solved that problem within the next 2 weeks. And when the HSE come back and do their audit, they'll go, oh, all right, that's a good idea. Oh, right, good. Yes, we can see you've made some reasonable adjustments to solve that problem. So there is a real, there's a real element of changing the way that people think, but also getting people that are managing these people to start thinking a bit differently. And sometimes when I talk to people and I look at the way in which they deal with me, it's usually interesting that there are people who will put the workers first. Health and safety is critical, and you can see all the things we've done around here, Andre, to help our workers. Yeah, that's really good. And others that will go, well, how much does this cost? Well, how much is an exoskeleton? And I had one recently, and the guy said, well, that's way too expensive. I went, against what? Well, I mean, just we think it's expensive. And I went, but one of your workers goes with a bad back, that's £5,000 to £15,000. The exoskeleton suggestion is half what you just that money, less than half. Oh, well, yeah, but it's still expensive because they're not taking it seriously. So I think there needs to be a lot more education and a lot more understanding of, it's not a joke. It's not something from a film. This is viable technology you can buy now with a bit of consultation and understanding that will help you and your workers, because you've invested in other things. And, I go to places and they're talking about robotics. And of course, I think that's the biggest threat to the exoskeleton market is the advance of robotics. But that might not happen for another 10 to 12 years. It all depends on how quickly the robotics market can make repetitive, and quite complex robots very cheaply. And they make that in 5 years. I was at a conference recently where they were talking about the advance of AI and the advance of robotics and the way that those two worlds are coming ever closer together, and showed us some good examples. And you think it was quite impressive and quite scary all at the same time. But then you start saying, yeah, but this is lovely. But in reality, most companies aren't going to replace their entire workforce with a bunch of robots because of the cost. So there's going to have to be something done to save the workers' backs and save the workers' shoulders and other parts of their bodies before the robots turn up. So I don't have all the answers. I wish I did, but something has to change. And I think that's a combination of potentially education, understanding, a lack, less of a resistance to change, and a different attitude to MHE in the workforce and PPE. And I think once people always ask me, oh, do you think the exoskeletons will become PPE? And I said, to an extent they already are, but they're a bit more complex than just a standard piece of PPE, like a high vis or a helmet or safety glasses. But as Bobby pointed out, people are still resistant to even wearing a pair of glasses, which is insane. What's the most not being able to see? That's quite a big thing, I would suggest. But and people. If you look at I looked at the HSE statistics, so that's the UK Body Health and Safety Executive. And I looked at the 21, 22, 23, 24 statistics, and the incidence of lower back and musculoskeletal disorders in 1 year went up by 120,000 cases. Now, that's those that have been reported. So the figure's way higher than that. But you start thinking, we're going backwards here. You're supposed to be going forwards, but we're actually going bloody backwards. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I actually wanted to mention that. So Dr. Schneider and I talked about that at the last WearHealth in the United States. And what he shared with me is that robotics and automation is most easily applied to jobs that are structured, where you have space, where you have the facility, where you have the room, where you have the people, the funding, which means that the dirty jobs, the jobs where he used an example of welding from inside a pipe, that's a crooked pipe, the ones where you need to be crooked, contorted, the one-off jobs, those are becoming more and more the ones that people will be doing. So the easy jobs, the ones that are safer and more structured, are getting automated. The difficult jobs, which have the higher risk of injury and the higher body contortion, they're the ones that are going to remain for people to do for generations to come. So if anything, we're going to see greater need for exoskeleton devices and wearable robotic devices and physical augmentation devices. The same is true for implants. People tell me on the medical side, oh, implants, you're going to put an implant, you don't need an exoskeleton, the implant will bypass the injured body part. Turns out, ironically enough, for the implant operation to be a success, you want the person to be in a peak physical condition as much as possible, medical exoskeleton once again, and then you need them to get mobilized efficiently with high dosage and a repetitive movement, which is again a medical exoskeleton. So in the public domain, we're told that this technology competes with that technology. But what we are seeing behind the curtains is exactly the opposite, that technology boosts the need for exoskeleton devices. The same thing is happening with humanoid robotics right now, where it's like, oh, you're going to introduce a humanoid robot that will like magically do everything. All that we are seeing is that now there's interest in low speed, high torque motors.
Yeah.
And humanoid robots have actually starting to bring down the cost of exoskeletons. That's the only thing we have seen. So once again, this competing technology is actually helping.
Yeah, it's complementary. Funny, a friend of mine that I used to work with at German Barnet, Andy, he now works for a company who promote the Boston Dynamics products. And we were at a show recently, he brought along the dog, and it's fascinating. It really is fascinating. And I was asking him what were the use cases for that. And in the case for that, a lot of the use cases are things where you don't want to send humans onto roofs, into pipe work, into places where that kind of environment isn't for humans, too risky or fraught with danger, or they may get stuck. And so it was interesting looking and understanding there's the kind of woo factor, and then there's the right, well, let's practically apply that to specific jobs. Now, I was at a company recently, and I won't say where or what they were doing, but he mentioned welding. And the funniest thing happened to me. I was talking to the guy, the operations director, and we were walking around this plant, and they were welding metal tubes. And he said, have you got anything that would be good for that? And I said, yeah. I said, there are some products on the market which I believe would be very, very good for that. And then he said, he called over one of the workers, and he said, whatever his name was, Dave, and he said, hey, Dave, he said, this guy does exoskeletons. And he went, what? And he said, yeah, he does exoskeletons. And he went, what's up then? And I explained it. But he said, I ain't going to wear one of them. And I hadn't really looked at him. But as he walked off like this. and his neck was all to one side, and he was skeletally a mess. And I just laughed, and I thought, well, you know what? You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. And it was one of those things where it would have been lost on the poor bloke. You know, he was too far gone to even consider that there was any help that we could have given him. So I think, you know, it's that educational process. I find personally that the most likely to adopt exoskeleton technology, ironically, are often the younger workers, because they think it looks a bit cool, it's quite good. They also, certainly when I look at my children's generation, my kids are, you know, sort of late teens, early 20s. They're all about making it easy for themselves. They ain't about making it hard. So they think, yeah, I've got to do this hard job. I'll put one of them on. It's going to make it easier, and at the end of the day, I can go home and I won't be quite so tired. So they get it. Not always, but they're more likely to be accepting of that kind of augmentation than someone in their 50s and 60s that are either A, terrified to put on because someone will laugh at them, and you know, then it's B, they just don't get it and it's an inconvenience they don't need and they don't like change, and why should I do that? I've been doing this all these years and I'm okay. Or C, they just don't get it at all, and you're not going to change their mind no matter how much you say you're going to benefit from this. They don't actually care. Their health is number 10 on their priority list. So we have a big hill to climb, in my opinion, but we will get there. And I think that, you know, for me, exoskeletons, I love going to work. I love my job. I love going to show people the technology, because if just one person that I talk to says, I put one of those on and it changed my life, I've got no back pain now, I feel better, I can do this or do that, and you should wear one because I did and it helps me, I've done my job. If I've saved somebody's back and I make their lives better through a bit of education and some application of technology, I'm a happy man. It's not just about making money, it's about making people's lives better. And it's about you know, sharing that passion and sharing that energy with people and saying there is a better way. There is a way of making your life better. But you know what? Like going to the gym, like doing any kind of sport, you're going to have to do some work. You're going to have to apply yourself to it, because it ain't going to just do it all for you. I need to provide you with something that's going to make you feel better at the end of the day and less fatigued. And of course, that's, you know, that's not always easy to get right, and it's difficult to explain that to people, but I make it my business to at least try, you know, and at least give them the facts. I'm not there to be all flash and whiz bang. I'm there to be giving them the facts. And if they don't want the facts, you know, there's not much I can do about that. But if I can make one person think, go, actually, you know what? Yeah, my back does hurt. Maybe I should try one of those, and it just might work for me. Then, you know, I've done my job. But also trying to explain to people, after 2 days, I ain't going to solve all your problems. This is not a silver bullet. This won't transform your life, but it will just make it quite a bit easier. And if you carry on wearing it and get over all the sweating and the slight discomfort and looking a bit funny, you'll probably be okay and probably make your life quite a bit better in the long run. And that's the thing that I struggle with sometimes, is that people, you know, people's attitudes towards things like diets, you know, or do this in 60 days. And after 60 days, what happens? No one talks about that. Yeah. You put on 3 times the bloody weight you did before you start the diet. You know, no one talks about, you know, the longevity. You know, put this on, leave it on, because you're going to need to leave it on. No, I'll put it on and it was great for 2 days, and after 2 days I took it off and I couldn't lift anything anymore. You know, it's a kind of sort of childish mentality that people have. You know, I had an argument with someone recently, and the guy said to me, "That's stupid." And I went, "What sort of car do you drive?" He looked at me and goes, "What?" I said, "What type of car do you drive?" And he very proud of him, "Oh, I've got a new Kia." I went, "Right, what do you want one of them for then?" And he went, "Oh, you know, it's got heated seats and it's even got a heated steering wheel and a nice stereo." And I went, "And?" And he went, "Well, you know, it's really convenient. It's got Bluetooth and sat nav." I went, "Well, why don't you just buy a car that's 50 years old? Still get you to work, probably. I don't understand why you need all this stuff." And he looked at me like, "Well, why wouldn't I?" I went, "I'm not being funny, mate, but your thinking about your health is the same as a 50-year-old car. and yet you drive a brand new, up-to-date car with all the luxuries and all of the gadgets. So why don't you apply the same thinking to your health? And he looked at me like, and that's what I get really mad when I hear this stupidity that comes out of people's mouths sometimes about, well, like, my car's more important than my own health. Really? Are you having a laugh? I mean, seriously, is there something, you've got a screw loose? You know, and then they sort of go, oh, right, yeah, okay, man. So if I just get them to think about their own, you know, some of the ridiculous things that come out of their mouths and get them just to think for 1 minute about their health, then even if they don't buy a damn thing, maybe they'll go and go, oh yeah, maybe I should think about that. Maybe this job, maybe lifting the super yacht on the back of my back every year isn't a very good idea. Maybe I am going to end up potentially in some serious problems. Maybe I'll give this thing a go. It might actually help me. And these are the challenges, you know, these are the things that we as an industry have to get right, but we have to make it easy for people to make choices, and we have to give them the information. And that, for me, is a big benefit of Stanley, because I don't have to go, no, it's got to be manufacturer A or manufacturer B. And then I work really hard to shoehorn my product into that use case by whatever means necessary. I don't have to do that. And a lot of manufacturers don't like that, by the way. They don't like it. They go, oh, no, we don't want to deal with you because you should only be promoting our products. Now, I'm not going to give them the single finger salute, but, you know, I'm going to be saying, well, actually, that's not how we work. We don't believe that actually is very, and actually when we talk to them and go, well, we've already proven that all these different manufacturers work with, they've all got bits of business from us, and people have a much better view of your product if it's not forced down their throats and we've tried to shoehorn it in somehow to make it fit, that actually we've given them the right product for the right task. And a lot of people, you know, I find resonate with that and they go, oh yeah, well, yeah, that kind of makes sense. Now, it's, as Thomas said, it's a bit of an unusual approach and we are quite unique in what we do, but I'd like to hope that, you know, that uniqueness that we have, you know, is a benefit to people. And if I can bring some benefit to people's lives as well as the environment in which they work in, then I've done my job and I can go home at the end of the day feeling happy that I've at least tried. I don't always get it right, you know, but it's about thinking a little bit further than just the end of your nose and being of service to people and being of service to their companies and being able to, you know, match as close to as possible the right solution for their particular requirements. And that can be quite difficult.
What really resonated with me that we just, you know, this can start to get us, I think, towards an end point as we've been going for a while. What really resonated with me is, as an industry, we need success stories. And what resonated with me is, I want to get the right product to the right task. And if I do that, that's going to help the industry, because I might have 5 companies. 3 will use product A, 2 will use product B, but at least now there's 5 companies saying exoskeletons are helping. Not, oh, I shoehorned this one exo into these 5 companies and ends up 3 hate the darn thing and 2 like it. This is what's coming in my head. And then those 3 people that hate it really hurt the industry. And so what really resonated with me with there is, how do we as an industry grow? And I think we grow by now, I mean, there's a ton of products out there, but we grow by having more than, I think what you said, it's more than a distributor. It's more of a product solution company. I don't know if that's the right word.
Yeah, great.
Product solution company where we go, we help you. Like, some tasks we're going to put a robot on, because that, you know, like if we're going to paint cars and you're going to breathe terrible fumes, we're going to use a robot. And then some tasks, you know, as Bobby was saying, there are some tasks that are just so hard to, the robotic dexterity just ain't there. We're going to use exoskeletons for those crooked welding tasks, and we're going to get that out there. Or like what I've heard is, like, robots bringing you all this stuff, we're actually making people work that harder, right? Because the robot brings you all these materials, and then you got to box it, and now you got to work to the rate. and you actually end up working harder, right? And so we'll have
Absolutely.
skeletons help. So I think I really like that last point that resonated, where a product solution, I'm going to be there to help you with the choice of the exoskeleton. I'm going to be there with the implementation. I'm going to be there with the data, and I'm going to be there in the long run to help you out. I think that's where some of these, I'm not even going to call them distributors, I'm going to call them like product solution companies,
Yeah.
are going to really help the industry.
And I think,
Integrators
yes,
is
yeah,
the
yeah, perfect.
US word. I want to mention, I've never heard of anyone talk before like you did at the negative repercussions. And it like looking through the history of marketing and change, I think brushing your teeth comes to mind, where people know what happens when you go to the dentist with a cavity. They understand that there's no magical pill and that there will be significant pain involved with you not taking care of your teeth. I think there's a misconception, and this is a tangent point. I think there's a misconception in the Western world that when your body fails physically, there's a magical company and a magical cure for that. The way that you have a headache, you get a Tylenol or an aspirin.
Absolutely.
And after people get injured, then they're surprised to find out that physical technology is lagging a little bit behind digital technology or pharmaceutical developments.
Yeah.
I got to experience that. I had a major surgery. There was nothing to get me mobilized. This is top of the line hospital in the middle of Silicon Valley. There was like one catapult, a Roman catapult looking thing that could lift a patient off in the corridor. I was completely on my own, and friends, loved ones, and parents to help me get remobilized and get me moving again. There was nothing. And you would think, but oh, it's like, oh, I'll get injured and then something will take care.
Yeah, the magic pill. I think it's almost like someone saying, you know, I mean, I've always liked the Japanese approach to health. You look after yourself firstly. You know, you look after your health, and it's a preventative medicine kind of approach, not a curative medicine approach. And so, you know, you only have to look at probably the greatest example on the planet was the OxyContin scandal, you know, where people were exploited to the point of terrible exploitation because they were in pain. And so it was, instead of thinking, well, actually, you know, what we need to do is we need to educate people about the prevention of these problems. And no one thing is perfect. No one thing. You know, I did a podcast recently for an osteopathy company. And a guy said, we chatted about this offline. He said, do you know what? He said, there are people that genuinely think that your industry is going to put me out of business. And I laughed my head off. And I said, who would think that? I said, you're about preventing musculoskeletal disorders in people like me that sit in a car all the time driving. I don't lift weights for a living. I don't work in a warehouse. I work in manufacturing. I'm as likely to be one of your clients as they are. And he said, I know, it's ridiculous. He said, the big sort of attitudes of put an exoskeleton, all your problems are over. No, absolutely not. And I think when we start to understand the curative, you know, elements of an exoskeleton, they're certainly nowhere near as good as the preventative elements of an exoskeleton. As, look, do this and it just might help you. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that this is going to change your life. It just might do, but it will make it better, that's for sure. And it will make it easier. And it will still, and you know, a lot of the things I try to explain to people, and I get this, one of I had a question recently, a guy said, what happens when I get home after wearing this product? So I said, sorry, could you explain? He said, well, does it mean that when I get home, I'll think that suddenly that 30-kilogram box that there'll be easier for me to lift? And I went, why would you think that? And I said, all right, let me put it this way. I said, if you got home at night and you spend your days wearing safety boots and you put your Nikes on and there was a bowling ball in the middle of your living room, would you go and kick it? And he went, well, of course I wouldn't. I went, think of an exoskeleton in the same way then. And he went, oh, right, yeah. And it's those sorts of bizarre kind of people like to do that to sometimes just be controversial. But when you explain, no, this is all about dealing with the weight you're dealing with. You know, I what I've done now is I've learned all the top 10 questions that people are going to ask me. And instead of waiting, I'll just give them all. Like, here's the top 10 questions you're going to ask me. Right. Does it do this? Does it do that? No, 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 no. Right. We've got all those out of the way with? Yes. Good. Right. We can move on. You know, so because that's what people do. They're, you know, robot, no, 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 it won't do this, it won't do that, it can't do this, it will not do this. And, you know, we laugh about it, but there's a serious message that often people just don't understand. And they go, I mean, the amount of places I turn up and people go, I didn't know this stuff existed. Wow. And you think, what? We think that's ridiculous, but there are a lot of people out there that literally have never heard of an exoskeleton. I mean, let's face it, 5 years ago, I hadn't. I didn't even know what one was. I thought, exo what? And so I look back to those days and think, well, come on, Andre, you didn't know what one was 5 years ago. Now, of course, you know, because that's your business. But so I think education is critical, but also giving people true facts, giving people actual education, not like as Thomas said, you know, wandering in and going, right, how do I do the typical salesman thing of shoehorning this product into here? It's a bit like me walking into a car showroom and there's a van showroom next door, you know, and they go, and I go, what? Look, the thing is, I need to move all this stuff constantly. Go, yeah, I'm going to get that in the back of a BMW, are you? He really needs a van. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to try and sell him this. I'm going to try and sell him this sedan. It's much easier. He might just about get stuff in it. No, no, no. What I'm looking for is a van. Well, no, just take the sedan. Well, you know, if you're doing the same thing with exoskeletons, how would we expect that to be successful? Instead of going, no, no, you're right, you need a van. This is what you need over here. That's the right tool for the job. So I think manufacturers have to be a little bit careful that they're not, and I've seen it. I've seen manufacturers burn people. It doesn't matter how we sold them 10 of those and they hate them. Yeah, but I still got the sale. That's an awful way of being. That's a really awful, immoral way of selling things to people because you've made a fast buck. Those are the people we need to be hard on. Those are the people we need to you know, get out of the industry. The ones with integrity, ones that will explain, even sometimes when quite literally there is no sale in it, but you just might get them to believe in something that they tell someone else about. That, in my opinion, is where, you know, that education process is critical and vital.
Wow. Yeah, there's so many topics that we didn't get around to, but maybe we could have you on another time later.
I'd love to. Yeah, it's been fascinating. I'm sorry I talk way too much than I should do, admittedly, but as you can see, I'm pretty passionate about what I do because I genuinely believe this technology is going to change people's lives. And, you know, it's really, I thank you so much for inviting me on because, you know, for us as a little company in the UK, you know, I genuinely believe that we're bigger than the sum of our own parts. And I think, you know, it's so critical to explain to people what this technology can do and how it can benefit people's lives. And I think, you know, with anything in life, you need people that have got a bit of passion, a bit of fire in their belly, that want to do good for the world and help people change things. And certainly, you know, my company is definitely one of those, and we don't always get it right. We often get it wrong, but we certainly try. And I think that, you know, I was really delighted when you invited me on, because I mean, you got, you know, the Exoskeleton report. I hold a lot of store by what you guys do, and I frequently point people towards your website and things that you've done and say, look, don't believe me. These are the guys, these are the authorities on exoskeletons, and they have a very good, solid view on things. And I think we need more people like you know, more people to spread the word, and people that can disseminate information to people in a way which they understand, and a way that connects with people, not, well, I've got all this research. You know, as I say to people, if I gave you 2 weeks on holiday, and at the end of the 2-week holiday, all I expect you to do is come back and give me the perfect exoskeleton for your business, I can guarantee you 2 things. One, you'll have a great 2 weeks off, but you'll have a massive headache at the end of the 2 weeks because you literally will not have a clue, and you won't be able to disseminate between all these different products. So that's where we come in, and we try to get it right. We don't always, but you know, I think we need to, as a community, share, be far more interactive with each other. So I was, thank you. Really appreciate you inviting me on. It was a great honor for me to be on today. I really, really have enjoyed it.
The pleasure is ours. I'm so happy for your time and your point of view. And there's so many more questions we didn't get to: how to talk to management, how to talk to upper management, how to explain return on investment, how to talk about an exoskeleton in the context of a stock market and 1 to 2 year life cycle, if you want to put it that way, in terms of companies. What to do when you have a contractor or a subcontractor who now doesn't have the defenses, doesn't have people looking out for them. They, for lack of a better word, they're disposable. There's so much that we can go. We can, like you said earlier, you can do an entire podcast series alone on some of these topics.
Yeah, very much so. But no, it's been a pleasure. Thank you. And obviously, if there's an opportunity to come on again, I would be more than delighted to do so, and hopefully share some of my experience. And if it just helps one person out there, I'd be happy to do so. That's very much so.
Thank you. Thank you in advance.
Yeah, thank you in advance. Wonderful. And all those questions, Bobby, you have, I think such good questions and such a good conversation today. We should do this again. So thank you.
And guys, if you're ever in Europe, please come and see us. We'd be delighted to host you. We're I was like, I'm a firm believer in the world's a small place, and if we can share information and learning with each other, then we should do. And it's an important thing to do so, because we're a small industry getting bigger. But we've got to, in my opinion, we have certain standards to uphold and certain integrity to uphold, and it's important that your podcast and things like this give people an independent view on things rather than just from a manufacturer's perspective. So yeah, I think that's important.
Thank you for bringing that up. And a reminder to everyone, if you like this content, please comment, subscribe, support us on Patreon, shoot us an email, give us your feedback, let us know what you would like to see in the future. And like Andre said, have this be a community, not a one-sided conversation.